Hey there, I'm Joshua Johnson. It's good to be with you on this Friday, October 7th, and here's some of what we're talking about tonight.
We need to bring inflation down without giving up all the historic economic progress that working class and middle class people have made.
And that could be possible based on today's unemployment report. We'll break down the new numbers, including a lower jobless rate. Would Russia really use nuclear weapons against Ukraine? Last night, President Biden called that hypothetical situation Armageddon. A retired lieutenant general helps us think that through. The school police in Uvalde, Texas are suspended tonight. All of them by order of the school district. What's behind this move, and where does Uvalde go from here? Also, we'll take a look at Alabama's system of capital punishment. A recent lethal injection attempt failed to find a suitable vein. Now the state wants to try again. And the World Cup is just over a month away. Qatar will welcome soccer fans this time around. We'll preview the tournament's first run in the Arabian Peninsula. So let's begin with today's jobs report. It suggests that the job market remains strong, but it might be cooling down. The U.S. added 263,000 jobs last month. Dow Jones estimated 275,000. It was also less than in August, when the economy added 315,000 jobs. Net effect of all that is that the unemployment stands at 3.5%. It was 3.7% last time. NBC's Tom Costello has more on today's report. Hey, Tom.
Hey, Joshua, good evening. So normally you would think that if you have an unemployment rate that drops down to 3.5%, a 50-year low, that's good news. It is good news. More people have jobs. But it's bad news also because that means now that the Fed is even more likely to keep raising interest rates because they're trying to cool the economy. And when you cool the economy to put the brakes on inflation, by default, the unemployment rate ticks up. Nobody wants to see people out of work, but the bottom line is that is a side effect of the Fed hopefully having some success in taming unemployment. Take a look at the month-to-month numbers and how we've seen the rate of new jobs decline. So I just want to draw your attention to what we had. For example, in July, we had about more than 500,000 jobs were created, 528,000 jobs. Then it dropped down to about 315,000 jobs created in August, and now 263,000 jobs created in September. What does that mean? The rate is slowing. So maybe things are starting to slow. The trouble is we have far more job openings than we have employers and rather employees willing to jump into those jobs. And therefore, we still see people making more money. Good news, except that's inflationary, and the Fed is still under pressure to act. So with that in mind, who remains unemployed right now? The total number, 3.5%, as we mentioned, 3.1% among whites, 5.8% among African Americans, 3.8% among Hispanics. As we often know, people of color are often the first to be let go and then the last to be hired in the event of a recession or in the event of a downturn. Now, we also saw, as you probably saw here, the stock market drop rather dramatically today, more than 2% on the Dow Jones Industrials. And it's because of that whole notion that the Fed is going to keep raising interest rates. That means borrowing, especially for companies, gets more expensive. And that also means people are going to be less inclined to go buy big ticket items, whether it's a car or a washing machine or a new house. That therefore suggests slowing the economy, and that means corporate profits drop. So that's why Wall Street dropped on what you would think should be good news for Main Street, but tough news for Wall Street. So now as we talk about going into the holiday season, what are we likely to see? Well, we know that some employers, big employers, have already said they're not going to be going to the full kind of staff mobilization that they had in previous years during the holidays, retailers especially. They may be more like at about 50% of what they did last year. Again, some companies are starting to not only freeze their hiring, but they say that they're going to slow down the rate of hiring during the seasonal work period, this time of year going into the holidays. Again, a strange kind of economic data today, right? It's good news for Main Street, but bad news for Wall Street, and then that could mean bad news for Main Street as the Fed continues to hike interest rates. The Fed's next decision comes on November 2nd, just before the midterms, and before that, we are expecting to get one last critical piece of data. Inflation data for September comes out next week. The Fed still expected to hike rates by another 1 to 1.5% in total. Joshua, back to you.
All right, thank you, Tom. That's NBC's Tom Costello starting us off tonight. Well, President Biden praised the jobs report. He tweeted that it's an encouraging sign of a transition to stable, steady growth. He also called it the fastest job growth in history. Let's continue with NBC's Monica Alba. Monica, good evening.
Good evening, Joshua. Since the pandemic started and since President Biden took office, he has been emphatic that the economic recovery is a marathon and not a sprint. And he has always talked about this in terms of the resilience factor and specifically the fact that unemployment at times has come down far lower than what experts expected, much like in today's jobs report. The president continues to tout much of his legislation, things like the Inflation Reduction Act, as helping with the economy as it continues to recover. But he does know that this is really going to take some time, and he spoke to that earlier today in remarks in Maryland. Take a listen.
We have to move from historically strong economic recovery to a more steady, stable recovery. We need to bring inflation down without giving up all the historic economic progress that working class and middle class people have made. And that's exactly what we're seeing. The pace of job growth is cooling while still powering our recovery forward.
It's no surprise inflation is likely to be a huge issue in the midterm elections. When you talk to voters and what's driving them, what's at the top of their list is often that refrain we have talked about so many times. It's the economy, stupid. You can expect that when we talk to voters as they head to the ballot box next month. And that's why you saw the president also today going after congressional Republicans, especially those who oppose some of the legislation that the president says will bring down the cost for many Americans of everyday things like health care, for instance. And so that's what you're going to continue to see in the weeks to come. And the president specifically is going to call out the GOP, he says, for going after things like Social Security and Medicare if they are to win back the House or Senate or both next month. Joshua?
All right. Thank you, Monica. That's NBC's Monica Alba reporting from Washington. Still to come, something the president certainly is not praising, the nuclear rhetoric from Russia. Vladimir Putin has hinted at using nukes in Ukraine. How seriously should we take that threat? We're glad you're with us for Now Tonight from NBC News. He wouldn't. Would he? Russia's president had a lot of people asking that after he hinted at using nuclear weapons in Ukraine. These days, world leaders seem less confident about it. And last night, President Biden was pretty blunt about it. He spoke at a Democratic fundraiser here in New York. The president said, quote, "We have not faced the prospect of Armageddon since Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis." He added, quote, "I don't think there's any such thing as an ability to easily use a tactical nuclear weapon and not end up with Armageddon," unquote. Last month, Vladimir Putin renewed his nuclear threats. Some military analysts have suggested that he could use a so-called tactical nuclear weapon to gain concessions from Ukraine. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has said that any nuclear weapon will be dealt with.
We will not hesitate in saying publicly that there will be catastrophic consequences for Russia
You've used
if
that
they
word
choose
twice.
to proceed, and the United States and our allies will respond decisively.
Joining us now by phone is Stephen Twitty. He's a retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General, and previously he served as Deputy Commander of U.S. European Command. Lieutenant General Twitty, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Can we just clarify what we're talking about in terms of the types of weapons that we think Vladimir Putin was referring to? I feel like a lot of people, when they think about this class of weapons, the most vivid images we have are Hiroshima and Nagasaki in World War II. These kinds of weapons, these classes of atomic and nuclear weapons, have come a really long way since then, right? We're not talking about something on that scale. I think we're talking about something much, much worse.
Well, we are talking about nuclear weapons. And so a lot of people will say, low yield weapons, 1 kiloton is pretty much a tactical nuke. And that tactical nuke has the ability to take out a city. It also has the ability, as the plume rises, to migrate to other countries. And so although we're not talking about the size of a nuclear weapon used in World War II, we are talking about something that could have a significant impact not only on the Ukrainian people, but we also have to remember that there are Russians inside of those oblasts, and there are Russian soldiers inside the oblast. So for Putin to use a tactical nuke, that means that perhaps you would have Russians that would die, Russian soldiers that would die, along with Ukrainian soldiers as well.
I want to ask you a little bit more about the nature of this weapon. So suppose, and I don't mean to pick on Chicagoans, but I'm just using Chicago as a landmark because it's center of the country. Everyone knows Chicago. So are we talking about the kind of weapon where if I was aiming for Millennium Park, you have a shot that could take out the city, but then we'd also be talking about the impact to Lake Michigan and Indiana and Ohio and have to get people indoors in Pennsylvania, Harrisburg, Pittsburgh, like the kind of an impact that is local, but then also has a downstream effect where people nearby would also have to worry about the impact?
Absolutely. And if you use Ukraine, for example, it could migrate to Poland, it could migrate to Turkey, it can migrate to the Baltic states. So although we're talking about the use of a tactical nuke within Ukraine, the plume could migrate based on the wind and other factors. I'm not a nuclear scientist, but other factors in play could have impact on NATO countries as well.
What do you make of the president's remarks and saying that we're basically closer to what he described as Armageddon more now than we have been since the Cuban Missile Crisis in the 60s? What do you make of that?
Well, Putin has done a lot of saber rattling with his nuclear arsenal of late, and we cannot take that for granted. And so we should be concerned. We should not be deterred. The Ukrainians should not be deterred, and they need to continue this offensive. What we need to be prepared to do is ensure that there are options on the table, not only to deter Putin from using nuclear weapons, but if needs be, counter his use of nuclear weapons.
You mentioned NATO countries. That seems like an incredibly problematic thing to do, right? Because that whole Article 5 commitment, an attack on one is an attack on all, he would basically be committing an act of war against the West, against NATO. I wonder what the strategy is for something like that. I mean, I guess I question the president's Armageddon comment because I don't know whether we would have to respond in kind to that kind of attack or whether we have other strategic options that are more conventional, cyber attacks, all kinds of other things, short of mutually assured nuclear destruction.
Yes. I don't see us responding in kind. What I do see us, there are other national instruments of power, whether it be a diplomatic instrument to further isolate Putin and Russia, whether it be economic, that means continue to ratchet up the sanctions, whether it be a conventional strike from a military perspective, and then there's informational. And so we call it the DIME, diplomatic, information, military, and economic instruments of power. So there are options that the president has. And what I would say to you is that I'm sure that the Pentagon and President Biden administration, they're looking at all those options. Conclude NATO looking at these options.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just looking at a map of NATO. I don't know if we have a good map of Ukraine or NATO countries nearby, but if you look at the western border of Ukraine, just about everything along that border is NATO members. Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Czech Republic, Romania all the way down, Hungary all the way down. So and you've got Finland and Sweden getting ready to try to join NATO, which nobody saw coming until this happened. What's the end game? What logical strategy could Vladimir Putin have for wanting to do that?
Well, he's backed in the corner. As you know, he's not faring well in this war. His troops have not performed well. Now he's receiving a lot of pressure from the Russian people to conclude his administration. So he's backed in the corner. And so we don't know what the end game is, but we do know that his options are narrowing. And essentially what he has left, number one, he can come to the table and negotiate, or number two, he can continue this war and then pull out things such as chemical weapons, tactical nukes, or even nukes. And so that closet is getting, smaller and smaller for him. And we don't know what he's thinking of right now, but his options are limited. So he's got very little in his tool bag now. And those options that I just mentioned are pretty much it. Let's hope he wakes up and comes to the negotiation table.
Let's hope indeed. Retired Army Lieutenant General Stephen Twitty. Sir, I appreciate you making time for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, for folks in Ukraine, it's a different story on the ground. The focus there remains largely on the battlefield. Ukrainian forces are advancing in the south and the east. Russian attacks have slowed their momentum, including near Europe's largest nuclear plant in Zaporizhia. That raises even more safety concerns on top of the nuclear threats. NBC's Cal Perry is in Ukraine with more. Cal, have we heard anything more from Ukrainian officials about President Biden's comments?
No official response from the Ukrainian government to President Biden's comments that he believes the world is closer to a nuclear Armageddon than it has been in 60 years, partly because Ukraine's focus, if you listen to officials, is on that counteroffensive, which continues in both the eastern part of the country and the southern part of the country. Lashing back out does seem to be the Russian military, hitting that city of Zaporizhia yesterday. Now at least 11 people confirmed killed in a residential area. The president of Ukraine saying that site was hit twice. They waited, he says, for the rescuers to arrive when Russians hit it again. Also in that area, Europe's biggest nuclear power plant once again coming under Russian artillery fire. We understand from officials that a power line running to the plant has been damaged. The plant itself not damaged, but certainly a concern to the IAEA chief, who was here on the ground yesterday confirming that the Russians are still in control of that plant, that parts of the outside of the plant have been mined. They've placed landmines in them, but that the plant itself has not been mined. He says it will be a priority for the IAEA to ensure both the safety of the people who work in the plant and the plant itself.
All right. Thank you, Cal. That was NBC's Cal Perry reporting from Ukraine. We will get to some of today's other top stories in just a moment, including the Uvalde School District suspending its entire police department, more details on President Biden's marijuana pardons, and how California is helping its residents deal with inflation. Tonight's headlines begin with marijuana policy. President Biden is pardoning thousands of people for federal convictions of simple marijuana possession. A new poll out today suggests Americans support this move. In the online survey from YouGov America, 61% of Americans said they strongly or somewhat approve. 26% said they strongly or somewhat disapprove. The president tweeted a video arguing that pardoning these offenses will help right the wrongs of previous marijuana policies.
While white and black and brown people use marijuana at similar rates, black and brown people are arrested, prosecuted, and convicted at disproportionately higher rates.
Let's discuss this move with Khadijah Tribble. She is the CEO of the Washington-based lobbying group, the U.S. Cannabis Council. Ms. Tribble, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Hi, Joshua. Good to see you.
What do you make of the president's move?
Listen, yesterday was a momentous occasion. Activists have been asking for some type of relief, and yesterday they got some. There's still a lot to do, but, we're going to celebrate the victory, and we're going to support those 6,000 plus families that will have a loved one coming home soon, so hopefully.
Can you give us a better sense in terms of the impact of this? I mean, the order through which the president did this was pretty surgical in terms of the nature of it. It's not every kind of, federal conviction connected to marijuana possession. It's just this piece, and it only applies to citizens and legal U.S. residents. People who are non-citizens or who are in the country without proper documentation are not covered by this. So in context, how big is the impact of this compared to the remainder of the impact of these laws?
Well, listen, I'm not going to. Last night I did an interview and I said something that people might mistake, right? We have to celebrate every victory. It's incremental change so that we can keep fighting. It's been a tough year for cannabis in general. And so I think the announcement yesterday did a couple of things. One, it laid out the context for which we can have a national conversation on all the ways in which we can address the harms associated with the war on drugs. He talked about the fact that he was going to pardon those with federal simple possessions. And as you just noted, that doesn't cover everyone. Most people understand that many of the individuals that are in prison for cannabis charges are with state charges. But he also talked specifically in encouraging our states, particularly those that are already legalized some form of cannabis, to get on board with pardoning at the state level. The third thing is the review, the conversation around rescheduling and what we hope descheduling cannabis. And so we have to have a starting point. We've been waiting for some kind of movement at the federal level. And while this does not do everything, it does give us a starting point. But I am hopeful that this will signal to our congressional leaders that the president has done what is in his power to do at this moment. What can the congressional leaders do? And I'm looking specifically at safe banking as a way to signal that it's time for the country to get on board with the 37 states in the District of Columbia who've already decided that cannabis should be regulated.
Yeah, for those who aren't as familiar in terms of how dispensaries have to do business, banks have rules that prevent dispensaries from just having an account like any other store. So there are all kinds of financial workarounds that dispensaries have to do in a variety of ways so that they can do business with proper storefronts. With regard to federal legislation, we spoke earlier this year to Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace of South Carolina, who supported a measure called the States Reform Act that would still change where cannabis sits in terms of federal regulation, but would give states a little more latitude in terms of how to set their own policies. Here is part of what Congresswoman Mace told us a few months ago. Watch.
The beauty of the States Reform Act is it could be state by state. There are only 3 states in the country that have no CBD or no cannabis whatsoever. And it essentially is turnkey because you have a framework that's already existed with alcohol for decades now and would make this really essentially legal overnight.
You had mentioned that the industry's had kind of a rough year. Could you expand on that a bit, please? And I know that there's an array of companies, big companies, small companies, and others trying to cultivate this industry. But depending on where you look, it's like the tri-state area here in New York is trying to stand up its regulations. That's taken longer than expected. California has had major fights in terms of illegal grow operations, some of which have been in national forests and parks, which is hugely problematic, issues with regulations and the cost of doing business. Is this industry going to make it? It seems like there are a lot of impediments right now.
There are a lot of impediments, but we're still hopeful and we're still fighting for the industry to make it. Let me say this, that when I talk about that the industry has had a tough year, I think the ecosystem of cannabis has been challenging. I've talked to folks all across the country, employees that work at cannabis companies who can't even secure bank accounts to do their regular business. We're talking about individuals who are making anywhere from $17 to $25 an hour, having their bank accounts closed because they work in cannabis. And so safe banking isn't just about large cannabis companies or even medium-sized. Access to banking is a fundamental challenge for any one of the thousands of employees that work in the cannabis industry, the thousands of folks who are working in the advocacy spaces that are working on the issue of cannabis. The very nonprofit that I founded, Marijuana Matters, is on its 3rd bank account. I heard from Wanda James out of Colorado that, she's paying over $40,000 a year just to have basic access to banking. And she doesn't even have all of the things that a local bakery would have in Denver that she has as a regulated cannabis dispensary. So this question of having access to banking runs the gamut. And so I think that there's an opportunity with the president's announcement yesterday to say to folks, it's time that our federal partners look to see what they can do. That includes the administration. We thank him. There's more to be done on that front. And we also need our congressional leaders to move a little faster on legislation.
Khadijah Tribble, CEO of the U.S. Cannabis Council. Good talking to you tonight. Thank you very much.
So much, Joshua.
Repairs are ramping up in Florida after Hurricane Ian, with a clearer estimate of the damage. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers announced it will install blue tarp-like coverings over roofs. Operation Blue Roof is a temporary fix to avoid more damage till repairs can be made. It's a free program available in Lee, Charlotte, Sarasota, Collier, and DeSoto counties. The sign-up period ends on October 23rd. You can apply online at blueroof.us or call 888-766-3258. Again, 888-766-3258. Meanwhile, there's a new estimate of Ian's damage. The modeling firm RMS puts the price tag around $67 billion of insured losses from Florida to the Carolinas. And that would make Ian Florida's costliest storm ever. The fallout from the mass shooting in Uvalde, Texas continues. Today, the school district announced that it suspended its entire police department. It's unclear how long the suspensions will last, but officers will fill in on other roles in the meantime. The district is asking the Texas Department of Public Safety to police campus and extracurricular activities for now. NBC's Gabe Gutierrez has more.
The school district police force is just a handful of officers, 5 of them, plus a security guard. And this is something that family members of the children killed in that massacre had been calling for. Still, it's unclear exactly why now, but just within the last few days, there had been another controversy brewing in Uvalde when a DPS trooper, that's a Department of Public Safety trooper who had been under investigation for her actions during the massacre, had just been hired by the school district's police department. And just yesterday, on Thursday, she was fired after her hiring came to light. Now, the school district is releasing a statement saying that it's requested the Texas Department of Public Safety to provide additional troopers for campus and extracurricular activities. We are confident that staff and student safety will not be compromised during the transition. The school district also saying that Lieutenant Miguel Hernandez and another district employee, Ken Muller, are on administrative leave. Muller, the director of student services, has now decided to retire, according to the school district. This comes after months of intense scrutiny into the law enforcement response to the massacre, where nearly 400 officers waited for more than an hour to confront the gunman at Robb Elementary. As for reaction from some of the family members of the victims, one of them who had been protesting outside the school district headquarters said on Friday that we did it. And others consider this a small victory, again, months after the massacre. Gabe Gutierrez, NBC News.
In Iran, the civil unrest continues after a woman's death in police custody. But the protests are being felt all around the world. Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe is a dual citizen of Iran and Great Britain. She says she knows the terrors of the Iranian regime all too well. And she told her story to our partners at Sky News. Here's International Affairs editor Dominic Waghorn.
Iranians have risen up in their thousands, demanding change like never before, with women playing a leading role. After Mahsa Amini, a young Kurdish woman, was killed in police custody. She'd been arrested simply for not wearing a headscarf. In her first TV interview since the unrest began, British-Iranian Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe has spoken out in support of the protesters.
Even though that was just the main trigger for the Iranian women to come out, that was not the whole reason. So Iranian women recently, together with the whole country, they have been struggling to make ends meet. There is poverty. There is a lot of repression in terms of what is happening inside Iran, and people are struggling to make ends meet.
Nazanin has a unique perspective on the plight of Iran's women, having felt firsthand the brutality of their regime. She was detained at Tehran airport in 2016 and held for 6 years on trumped-up charges. She can speak with authority about what is happening to Iranians now as they're rounded up and jailed.
The story of what is happening in Iran at the moment resonates with my story in many different levels, but also in a way that I was abducted at the airport. I was incommunicado for about a month. Nobody knew where I was. And this is exactly what is happening to many women who are protesting in the streets at the moment. They often get arrested, put in an unknown place. Nobody knows where they are.
As the protests have intensified across Iran, there's been condemnation of its repression in the West, but little action. Nazanin's release from jail was delayed as different interests held back the British government. She says it must do more now for Iranians in their hour of need.
Issuing a statement is not enough, but it's a good gesture. But that is not enough in a way because countries have got their own agenda. So they do businesses with Iran. They have got diplomatic relationships with Iran, so they probably put that a priority. So if they want to issue a statement in terms of condemning what is happening in Iran, they would take into account how that would impact their own relationship, which I think is wrong, because human rights should not be under the shadow of any other.
Unrest has followed a depressing pattern in Iran. Spontaneous protests stamped out with mass arrests, torture and brute force. This unrest seems more entrenched and more widespread than before, but the regime's crackdown is already well underway. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News.
This year's Nobel Peace Prize was awarded today. The honor goes to one human rights activist and 2 human rights organizations. The Nobel Committee recognized Ales Bialysky, a jailed activist in Belarus, also the Russian Human Rights Group Memorial and the Center for Civil Liberties in Ukraine. The committee says these honorees have, quote, made an outstanding effort to document war crimes, human rights abuses, and the abuse of power. Together, they demonstrate the significance of civil society for peace and democracy, unquote. But the selection raised some eyebrows in Ukraine. One Ukrainian presidential advisor tweeted that the Nobel Committee has, quote, an interesting understanding of the word peace if representatives of 2 countries that attacked a third one receive at Nobel Prize together, unquote. Inflation in California is getting harder to bear. So today the state started helping some residents with cash in their pockets. Millions of Californians will get inflation relief payments. They range from $200 to just over $1,000, and that money comes from this year's state budget of $308 billion. California's Governor Gavin Newsom said this would be the largest state tax rebate in the country. This is just the first round of payments. Another round starts at the end of the month. The plan was announced when gas prices skyrocketed in the state. AAA says a gallon of regular in California right now averages $6.39. Governor Newsom says he wants a special legislative session aimed at taxing the profits of oil companies. Alabama is trying to execute a man on death row for the second time. The first time it tried, he survived. We'll tell you what happened and what happens now just ahead. Stay close. Fair warning, this next story might be a little hard to stomach, especially if needles or blood bother you. The state of Alabama is planning to execute a death row convict who survived the state's first attempted lethal injection on him. Alan Eugene Miller was scheduled to be executed a couple of weeks ago, but the staff apparently could not find a suitable vein. Elizabeth Brunig of The Atlantic writes that prison staff tried with Miller for more than an hour before he, quote, was left hanging off the upright gurney, his hands and 1 foot bleeding from failed IV attempts, waiting to die, unquote. Officials called off the execution just before midnight. Otherwise, his death warrant would have expired. Yesterday, Alabama's Attorney General's office asked the state Supreme Court to set a second execution date. The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that subsequent attempts to carry out the death penalty do not violate the Constitution. Joining me now is Evan Mealens. He's been covering the story as a justice reporter for the Montgomery Advertiser. Mr. Mealens, welcome. Good to have you with us.
Hi, good to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Tell us more about Alan Eugene Miller. How did he get to this point where now the state is trying to execute him again?
Right. So I'll start from the beginning. He was convicted for triple murder that occurred in 1999. He's on death row up until this year, still is. He requested that he be executed by nitrogen hypoxia, which has never been used before. The Supreme Court eventually okayed his execution by lethal injection, overturning a lower court's ruling. And then the night of the actual planned execution, as we know, the state tried for about 90 minutes to establish an IV in different parts of his body and failed. Now we see that the Attorney General's office is trying again, and the Supreme Court has not yet ruled. The Alabama Supreme Court has not yet ruled to set an execution date.
Nitrogen hypoxia, that would basically be like what carbon monoxide does. It kind of displaces the oxygen in your body and you essentially asphyxiate, right?
That's right. That's right. So you're breathing pure nitrogen under this method. Pure nitrogen, it replaces all the oxygen in your body, and you die within a few minutes, is what we think. But once again, we've never seen this in practice in terms of an execution, so it's hard to say exactly how it would play out.
How common is what happened to him? I mean, I can understand, phlebotomists have trouble trying to find a vein when they're drawing blood or taking samples, but surviving a lethal injection execution, how common is that?
It's not very common. One of the only other few times that it's happened was also in Alabama. Doyle Lee Ham survived the state's execution attempt against him in 2018. They couldn't establish an IV. They tried for hours, poking him, throughout his body and his groin and his legs, puncturing him at least 11 times. There have been 2 other cases, both in Ohio, where there was a failed execution attempt, but for all intents and purposes, it's pretty rare. That's not to say that Alabama does not have issues carrying out executions appropriately and effectively, which they've shown that they do in the past few.
Elaborate on that a bit. Granted, no one is here from the state of Alabama to defend their methods, but what are some of the challenges that Alabama has gone through in terms of enacting capital punishments?
Sure. With Joe Nathan James, for example, the state tried for about 3 hours before they were able to establish an IV. Once again, Doyle Ham, they were not able to establish an IV. Miller here, not able to establish an IV. There were other cases in Alabama in the past where the lethal injection just didn't go as planned, where the individual still died, but they were seen coughing and moving on the execution table.
Opinions on capital punishment, including lethal injection, are mixed in this country. I think every now and then we have like a national conversation. I think, after the movie The Green Mile came out, we talked a lot about, the electric chairs and so on. But I still wonder what the discussion is like in Alabama. I mean, the idea that somebody who murdered 3 people gets to choose the way that he dies to be less painful or more peaceful, I think would be abhorrent to a lot of people, that he should have any say in it at all. But what's the conversation like in Alabama?
That's a good question. There are obviously people on both sides of the issue. I think a lot of people just think Alabama, with the issues it's had in the past, needs to take a look at what it's doing and assess itself. There are other people who support, obviously, the option to select nitrogen hypoxia or lethal injection. They touted nitrogen hypoxia as being more humane. Once again, we don't really know because we've never seen it carried out. But I think many people in the state and throughout the country recognize or feel that there are issues in how Alabama is carrying out its executions.
And we should note, there are certain guardrails in the Constitution, against cruel and unusual punishment. So it's not like you could, there are limits in terms of how one can be put to death, and that factors into why the first lethal injection was stopped, right?
Could you repeat that question? I'm sorry.
Just in terms of cruel and unusual punishment, there are limits in terms of what governments can do to enact the death penalty, which I guess kind of gets at, because I know we're low on time, on what happens now. What is the next step in this process? Since they weren't able to find a vein the first time, are they just going to try again, or what happens now?
That's an important question, and we don't really know at this time. Obviously, there are guardrails set up by the Constitution against cruel and unusual punishment. That is what Miller's attorneys have argued, that to try to execute him again in this same way after failing the first time, subjecting him to what he described as a traumatic experience would be cruel and unusual. And, when Doyle Hamm, when his execution failed, his attorneys argued that it was a violation of his protection against double jeopardy. We're not seeing that with Miller's attorneys in this case, but definitely that cruel and unusual punishment line is being argued.
Evan Nealons, a justice reporter at the Montgomery Advertiser. Appreciate you breaking this down for us tonight. Thank you very much.
Hey, thank you.
The World Cup is kicking off next month in Qatar. We'll take a look at some of the changes and the potential challenges before we go. The World Cup kicks off next month in Qatar. Soccer's biggest showcase will feel very different from previous tournaments. Typically, the World Cup final would be held in July. This time, the tournament will be played in November and December. FIFA changed it because summer in Qatar is brutally hot. This is the first World Cup in the Arabian Peninsula, and that puts the matches in a different cultural environment than some fans may be used to. This week, a poster circulated on social media with the hashtag #ReflectYourRespect. It shows a list of things to avoid while visiting Qatar. Among them, drinking alcohol, homosexuality, and profanity. According to the Associated Press, Qatar's government did not create or release the poster. The state agency organizing this World Cup says that image contains factual errors. In a statement, it adds that Qatar is an open, tolerant, and welcoming nation, and an official fan guide is in the works to refute some of that other poster's claims. The World Cup brings a lot of cultures together, including groups with very different values. How will this year's event manage those connections and those potential conflicts? Let's get into that with Kevin Baxter, a soccer writer with the Los Angeles Times. Welcome. Good to have you with us.
Hey, good to be with you, Joshua.
So can you put this controversy over this social media image in some context? How big a deal is this really?
Well, what's really interesting is you mentioned that the government pushed back on some facts. I was in Qatar in June, and what people in the street told me is largely what's in this flyer. I mean, big soccer tournaments like the World Cup, European Championships, they're big parties. But think of this one not so much as being a fraternity kegger or a heavy metal concert. This is going to be more like a cello recital. It's going to be, you have to take this down a notch. I think it's the first World Cup or Olympic Games that be held, as you mentioned, in the Arabian Peninsula, in the Middle East, or even in a Muslim majority country. And what I heard from people there is that they expect visitors, 1.2 million coming into the country for the World Cup. They want them to be respectful of the Muslim culture.
I'm not sure how this is supposed to be a cello recital. I mean, there have been some real issues with not only hooliganism, but just unruly fans at soccer events. I mean, there was an event in Liverpool where there was drama around tickets, and that got really ugly. This situation in Indonesia, where people died in a riot after the games, like, how much control does Qatar think it's actually going to be able to exert on soccer fans?
Well, that's the question. I mean, this is a country of 2.9 million, so they're going to have 1.2 million coming in for this tournament. They've already acknowledged that they really don't have enough hotel rooms. People will be flying in daily on shuttle flights from nearby countries. The whole idea of alcohol, they're going to try to limit alcohol consumption. They will have a place called the Arcadia Festival, be 2 miles outside Doha, where they will serve beer 19 hours a day, and they will have fan fests where beer will be sold. But you can't get it in most of the hotels, bars, and restaurants around town. So my fear is that there'll be a lot of fans that will say, hey, you know what? I'm heading back to my hotel. There's nothing to drink there. I'm going to have 4 or 5 beers for the road. And I think that's where there's going to be some problems. I think people are going to become intoxicated at the games. And as they leave the games, I think that's just going to lead to more problems than perhaps the Qataris are aware of at this point.
So paint me a picture of the flip side of this. We know what some of the issues may be. You mentioned that there was a test match last month in Doha where problems arose even before the doors opened, according to your newsletter. What is the side of Qatar that the Qatari government wants the world to see? What would they like people to come away from the World Cup with?
Well, you kind of hit on 2 issues there. First of all, the test match was a huge disaster. And remember, this is a country that's had 12 years, a record 12 years to prepare for this. The test match was a disaster. Ambulances didn't know where to park. Parking lots that were supposed to be served by shuttles were not. There was a long line to get in. They ran out of water at halftime. The sound system didn't work. The air conditioning didn't work. It was a disaster from the start. And the Qataris responded to that by issuing a call to call people to their military service. Even diplomats are being brought home from foreign postings to be inducted into the military to serve as security and other volunteers at the stadiums because this thing has just gone off the rails. And so that is a big problem. The Qatari government says that everything is fine and that this is going to be just great. But one of the things that the Qataris told me is like, look, they likened it repeatedly to a visitor coming to your house and you ask the visitor to take your shoes off. It's just a modest request. They say, look, it's not anything about homosexuality, that there's just no public displays of affection. So if you want to kiss your husband or if you're a woman and you want to kiss your wife, that wouldn't be okay for a heterosexual couple. It's not so much homosexuality they're against. Again, no drinking, just a lot of no dancing, no loud music, a lot of things that are associated with major sporting events. The Qataris are looking at as sort of an affront to their culture, and they've asked guests not to do those things while they're in the country. And the government, the Supreme Committee for Delivery and Legacy, which is the local organizing committee, right, they've talked about that. Please respect our culture. That's the message.
Let me ask you about some of the matches. I know I got to let you go in a second, but this is going to be the last World Cup for Lionel Messi, the captain of the Argentinian team. He's 39 years old, has never won a World Cup. What is the handicapping in terms of who is expected to do well in this World Cup?
Well, Brazil's ranked #1 in the world, but this is Leo Messi's World Cup, I think. Argentina, by their second game of the group stage, they should win their first 2 games. They will have the longest unbeaten streak in international soccer history. They'll be at 37 games. Leo Messi needs to win this. He's the best player of his generation, but back home, he's no better than second best. Diego Maradona, who's won World Cups, is a god in Argentina. Literally has his own religion in Argentina. Leo Messi needs to win this World Cup to rank equal with Diego Maradona just in Argentina, even though the rest of the world considers him probably the best player of all time.
And can you give me, I am not a World Cup or a soccer fan, but can you give me one thing that people who don't follow the World Cup should bear in mind or keep an eye out for if they want to watch this year and really be part of the drama and the excitement of what's going on before we go?
Yeah, look for some of the minnows, teams like Ecuador, Saudi Arabia, Iran, teams that come in, even Qatar, come in good form. If they hit the right streak and get into the knockout rounds and even to the quarterfinals, it'll be fun. Those countries will go crazy. The players will have a good time. Conversely, look at the teams like Argentina, Brazil, Belgium, Germany, teams with a lot of pressure on them. Mexico is another team, a lot of pressure on them. When they don't do well, that could be a little bit ugly.
You said Lionel Messi has his own religion. Did I hear that right?
No, Diego Maradona does.
Diego Maradona. I was about to see, I clearly don't understand soccer. I was going to have to apologize to the acolytes because my note accidentally said he was 39. He is 35. Apologies to Lionel Messi fans. But I appreciate you making time.
He may get his own religion. Yeah, if he wins, he may get his own religion.
He just might. He might. Kevin Baxter of the LA Times, good to see you. Thank you very much. And we should note, by the way, the World Cup will air on Telemundo and Peacock. Both of them are corporate cousins of NBC News, owned by NBC Universal. Remember, you can always send us your thoughts and questions on this or anything we discuss. We're at NBC Now Tonight on social media. Leave us a voicemail, 888-575-2NBC, or email nowtonight@nbcnews.com. Until we meet again, I'm Joshua Johnson. See you Monday. Good night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.